The deafening crack of a pistol shot echoed across the dusty plains of Wyoming Territory as Beatrice Green ducked behind an overturned wagon, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. The year was 1882, and she had just witnessed the murder of the last stagecoach guard who'd been protecting her journey west. Now she was alone, facing a gang of ruthless bandits who had ambushed the coach at sunset, their faces hidden behind dirty bandanas, their intentions clear in their cold eyes. "Come on out, little lady," called a raspy voice. "We ain't gonna hurt you." Much. Beatrice clutched her small Derringer pistol, knowing its single remaining bullet wouldn't save her from 5 armed men. Her amber-colored dress was torn at the hem from her desperate scramble for cover, and dust clung to her chestnut hair that had come loose from its pins. The setting sun cast long shadows across the barren landscape, offering no hope of rescue in this desolate stretch between settlements. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her grip her weapon tighter, certain the bandits were closing in. But the sudden confusion in their voices told a different story. "Who the hell is that? It's just one rider. Shoot him." A fusillade of gunfire erupted, followed by the distinctive sound of return fire measured, precise shots that found their marks with deadly accuracy. One by one, the bandits' voices cried out in pain or fell silent altogether. Beatrice remained frozen behind the wagon, unsure if her situation had improved or worsened. "Madam," a deep voice called out, "are you hurt? The danger's past." Cautiously, Beatrice peered around the edge of the wagon. Standing there, silhouetted against the crimson sky, was a tall figure holding the reins of a magnificent black stallion. As he stepped closer, she could make out his features, a weathered face beneath a wide-brimmed hat, piercing blue eyes that held both kindness and caution, and broad shoulders that spoke of a lifetime of hard work. "I'm Archer Turner," he said, holstering his revolver. "Looks like I came along just in time." Beatrice stepped out from her hiding place, still clutching her small pistol. "Beatrice Green," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "And yes, Mr. Turner, your timing is impeccable." Archer Turner surveyed the scene, the dead driver and guards, the ransacked stagecoach, and the bodies of the bandits he'd just dispatched. His expression remained grim as he turned back to Beatrice. "Where were you headed, Miss Green?" "Promise Creek," she answered. "I'm to take over the schoolhouse there." A flicker of something surprise perhaps crossed his face before he nodded. "That's my home, about 15 miles west of here." He glanced at the darkening sky. "Night's coming fast. We need to make camp and head there tomorrow." "Camp?" Beatrice repeated, looking around at the bodies surrounding them. "Here," Archer shook his head. "There's a creek about a mile north with better shelter. Can you ride?" When Beatrice nodded, he helped gather her belongings from the stagecoach, a trunk containing books, clothing, and the few mementos of her life back east. Within minutes, they were riding away from the grisly scene, Beatrice seated behind Archer on his powerful horse, her arms tentatively encircling his waist. As they rode, Beatrice studied the back of her rescuer. His shoulders were broad beneath a well-worn leather vest, and his movements in the saddle spoke of a lifetime on horseback. He smelled of leather, gunpowder, and the open plains so different from the cologne-scented gentleman she'd known in Boston. "Why were you out here alone, Mr. Turner?" she asked, breaking the silence. "I was tracking those men," he replied, his voice carrying back to her on the evening breeze. "They've been raiding homesteads and coaches for months. Didn't expect to find them attacking a stagecoach today, though. Then I'm fortunate you were pursuing them." Archer glanced back at her, his expression softening slightly. "Seems we both got lucky, Miss Green." They reached the creek as the last light faded from the sky. Archer efficiently set up a small camp, building a fire that cast dancing shadows across the rocky outcropping that sheltered them. From his saddlebags, he produced jerky and hardtack, offering her the meager meal with an apologetic smile. "Not what you're accustomed to, I expect." Beatrice accepted the food gratefully. "I left behind my expectations of comfort when I decided to come west, Mr. Turner." "And what brought you to make such a decision?" he asked, settling across the fire from her. Beatrice stared into the flames, considering how much to share with this stranger who had saved her life. "My father passed away last year." He was a professor at Harvard. Left me with books and knowledge, but little else. She looked up at him. The advertisement for a teacher in Promise Creek offered a fresh start. Archer nodded slowly. We need a good teacher. The last one didn't last a month before heading back east. Why not? Life's hard out here. Beautiful, but hard. He poked at the fire, sending sparks dancing upward toward the star-filled sky. Promise Creek's growing, but it's still rough around the edges. The children need education, though, need someone who won't give up on them. I don't give up easily, Mr. Turner, Beatrice said firmly. His blue eyes studied her with new interest. I'm beginning to see that, Miss Green. As the night deepened, Archer insisted she take his bedroll while he kept watch. Despite her exhaustion, sleep came fitfully to Beatrice. Every sound in the darkness startled her, bringing back the memory of gunshots and the faces of the dead men. Near dawn, she awoke to find Archer still sitting vigilant by the reduced fire, his profile etched against the pale beginnings of daylight. Do you ever sleep? She asked softly. He turned to her with a slight smile. Not much these days. You've been fighting those bandits for some time, haven't you? Archer's jaw tightened. 3 months ago, they raided a farm near Promise Creek, killed a good man, left his wife to run the place alone with 3 young children. He paused, adding almost as an afterthought, she was my sister. Beatrice sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders against the pre-dawn chill. I'm sorry for your loss. Sheriff does what he can, but his jurisdiction only stretches so far. The territory's too vast. Archer stood, stretching his tall frame. We should get moving. I want to reach Promise Creek by midday. The morning ride revealed the stunning beauty of the Wyoming landscape, rolling plains giving way to distant mountains, the early sun casting a golden glow over everything it touched. Archer pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the area, his deep voice rumbling against Beatrice's chest where she held onto him. There, he finally said, pointing toward a cluster of buildings nestled in a valley alongside a winding creek. Promise Creek. As they approached, Beatrice could see it was larger than she'd imagined, at least 24 buildings, including a proper main street with a general store, saloon, and what appeared to be a small hotel. At the edge of town stood a white clapboard building with a bell tower. The schoolhouse, Archer explained, and that small cabin beside it is the teacher's quarters. It's perfect, Beatrice breathed, already imagining herself teaching there. Their arrival drew curious stares from townspeople going about their morning business. Archer nodded greetings to several as he guided his horse down the main street toward a building with a sign reading Sheriff's Office. Need to report what happened, he explained, dismounting and helping Beatrice down. The sheriff, a grizzled man named Hiram Wilson, listened soberly to their account of the stagecoach attack. He seemed particularly interested in Archer's description of the bandits. Sounds like the Cowboy gang, he said, scratching his beard. Been after them for months. You're sure all 5 are dead? Positive, Archer replied. I checked each one. Sheriff Wilson nodded slowly. Well, Miss Green, seems you owe your life to one of the finest men in the territory. Archer Turner's got a reputation as a man who keeps his word and stands his ground. Beatrice glanced at Archer, who seemed uncomfortable with the praise. I've certainly seen evidence of his character, she agreed. After completing their report, Archer escorted Beatrice to the hotel where she could rest and refresh herself before meeting the town council that evening. As they walked, he pointed out various establishments: the general store owned by the Peterson family, the blacksmith shop run by a former slave named Frederick, who was renowned throughout the territory for his skill, and the small church at the end of the street. The town's growing, Archer explained. 2 years ago, this was barely a settlement. The railroad coming within 20 miles changed everything. And what brought you here, Mr. Turner? Beatrice asked. A shadow passed over his face. I came looking for a place to start over. Found land with good water and decided to put down roots. Your ranch is nearby, about 3 miles north of town. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. 200 acres, a decent herd of cattle, and a house I built with my own hands. There was pride in his voice that made Beatrice smile. It sounds wonderful. They stopped outside the hotel, and Archer suddenly seemed uncertain, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. The council meets at 7 in the town hall. I can come escort you if you'd like. "That would be very kind, Mr. Turner." He tipped his hat and turned to leave, then paused. "Miss Green, yes, I'm glad you didn't give up on Promise Creek because of what happened. We need someone like you here." Before Beatrice could respond, he strode away, his long legs carrying him quickly down the street. She watched him go, realizing with a start that she felt safer knowing he was nearby. The town council meeting that evening was held in a room above the general store. 7 men and 2 women comprised the council, and they welcomed Beatrice warmly, expressing horror at her ordeal and gratitude for her determination to fulfill her contract despite it. "The children have been without proper schooling for months," explained Martha Swenson, a stout woman with kind eyes. "We've managed with parents taking turns, but it's no substitute for a trained teacher." "How many students should I expect?" Beatrice asked. 27, ages 6 to 16, replied Joseph Peterson, the store owner. "Some can only attend seasonally when farm work allows." The discussion continued, covering her duties, salary, and the condition of the schoolhouse and teachers' quarters. Throughout it all, Beatrice was aware of Archer sitting quietly at the back of the room, his presence reassuring. When the meeting concluded, he approached as the council members filed out. "They're good people," he said quietly. "Some have had hard lives, but they want better for their children." "I can see that," Beatrice agreed. "They seem very committed to education." Archer escorted her back to the hotel through the now dark streets of Promise Creek. The town had transformed after sunset lanterns glowed in windows, music drifted from the saloon, and the stars overhead seemed impossibly bright. "Will you be all right here?" he asked as they reached the hotel porch. "After what you've been through?" Beatrice appreciated his concern. "I'll be fine, Mr. Turner, though I admit I'll sleep easier knowing those bandits won't be threatening anyone else." He nodded, his expression somber in the lamplight. "Miss Green, He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "If you need anything at all while you're settling in, please don't hesitate to ask. My ranch isn't far. Thank you for everything." As Archer turned to leave, Beatrice was struck by the realization that this man, this cowboy who had saved her life and shown her nothing but kindness, was quickly becoming important to her in ways she hadn't anticipated. The next morning, Beatrice was surprised to find Archer waiting outside the hotel with a wagon loaded with her trunk and several packages. "Thought you might want to see your new home," he explained. "And I took the liberty of asking Martha Swenson what you might need. She suggested some basic provisions to start you off." Touched by his thoughtfulness, Beatrice climbed onto the wagon seat beside him. As they drove through town toward the schoolhouse, several people called out greetings, clearly curious about the new teacher. The schoolhouse was simple, but found a single large room with rows of benches and desks, a teacher's desk on a small platform, and a blackboard covering most of one wall. Windows let in ample light, and a pot-bellied stove promised warmth for the coming winter months. "It's perfect," Beatrice said, running her hand along the smooth surface of the teacher's desk. "Wait until you see 27 rambunctious children filling those seats," Archer replied with a chuckle. "Might not seem so perfect then." The teacher's quarters attached to the rear of the schoolhouse were modest, just 2 rooms, a combined kitchen and sitting area and a small bedroom. But the furniture was sturdy, the floors were clean, and someone had placed a vase of wildflowers on the small table. "Martha's welcome," Archer explained, seeing her notice the flowers. "She's appointed herself your unofficial guardian. Expect frequent visits bearing food and advice." Beatrice laughed. "I'll welcome both." They spent the morning setting up her quarters, Archer bringing in her trunk and the provisions while Beatrice arranged her books and personal items. Their conversation flowed easily as they worked, and Beatrice found herself sharing stories of her life in Boston while Archer described his journey west after the Civil War. "I was too young to fight," he explained, "but I saw what the war did to my older brothers who came back changed men. Made me restless, wanting something different. And have you found it here?" she asked. He paused, looking around the simple room and then back at her. "Parts of it," he answered quietly. By midday, the quarters were habitable if not fully organized. Archer built a fire in the small cook stove and helped prepare a simple meal from the provisions he'd brought. They ate at the small table, and Beatrice was struck by how comfortable his presence felt in what was now her home. "School starts Monday," he asked. She nodded. 3 days to prepare. "The council gave me the previous teacher's notes, but they're rather sparse." "She didn't stay long enough to write much," Archer said with a grimace. "City woman who found the realities of frontier life too harsh." He studied Beatrice's face. "You're made of sterner stuff, I think." "I hope to prove you right." After lunch, Archer reluctantly mentioned he needed to return to his ranch. "Cattle don't feed themselves, and I've been away too long already." "Of course," Beatrice said, walking him to the door. "I can't thank you enough for everything you've done." He turned to face her, his expression suddenly serious. "Miss Green, Beatrice, I'd like to call on you properly if you'd permit it." The formal request caught her by surprise, though not unpleasantly. "I would like that very much, Mr. Turner." "Archer," he corrected gently. "If we're to be friends, at least." "Archer," she repeated, liking the way his name felt on her lips. He tipped his hat and departed, leaving Beatrice standing in the doorway of her new home, watching his tall figure stride toward the wagon. She was still processing all that had happened in the past 2 days: the terrifying attack, her rescue by this enigmatic cowboy, and now the prospect of building a life in this frontier town where she knew no one. Yet somehow, she felt less alone than she had in months. The next 3 days passed in a flurry of activity as Beatrice prepared for her first day of teaching. She organized the schoolroom, reviewed what limited curriculum existed, and created lesson plans for students of varying ages and abilities. Throughout Promise Creek, word spread quickly about the new teacher, and Beatrice found herself receiving a steady stream of visitors' mothers bringing baked goods and introducing their children, council members checking on her progress, and Martha Swenson offering practical advice about everything from dealing with winter storms to handling rowdy older boys. "Don't let them test you," Martha warned. "Show strength from day one." On Saturday afternoon, as Beatrice was writing vocabulary words on the blackboard, she heard the schoolhouse door open. Turning, she found Archer standing there, hat in hand, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Am I interrupting?" he asked. "Not at all," she replied, setting down the chalk and brushing dust from her hands. "I'm just preparing for Monday," he nodded, glancing around the organized classroom. "Looks like you're making it your own." "I'm trying. Did you need something?" Archer cleared his throat. "There's a social at the church tomorrow after services. Thought you might like to attend, meet more of the townspeople. I could escort you if you'd like." The invitation warmed her. "I'd be delighted." "Good," he smiled, relief evident in his expression. "I'll come by around 10 tomorrow morning if that suits." After he left, Beatrice found herself humming as she continued her preparations, her mind occasionally wandering to thoughts of tomorrow and the prospect of spending more time with Archer Turner. Sunday morning dawned clear and beautiful. Beatrice dressed carefully in her best dress, a deep blue that complemented her eyes, and pinned her hair in a simple but elegant style. When Archer arrived, he was similarly dressed in his Sunday best: clean black trousers, a white shirt, and a vest that emphasized his broad shoulders. He'd clearly taken extra care with his appearance, his usually untamed hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. "You look beautiful, Miss Green," he said, momentarily forgetting his resolution to use her first name. "And you look very handsome, Archer," she replied, enjoying the flush that rose to his cheeks at the compliment. The small white church was filled to capacity when they arrived. Heads turned as Archer escorted Beatrice to a pew, and she was acutely aware of curious glances and whispers. Clearly, Archer Turner accompanying the new schoolteacher to church was noteworthy. The service was simple but heartfelt, led by a young preacher named Reverend Samuel Matthews. His sermon focused on community and new beginnings, themes that resonated deeply with Beatrice. Throughout the service, she was conscious of Archer beside her, his deep voice joining in the hymns, his steady presence a comfort in this unfamiliar setting. Afterward, the congregation moved to tables set up behind the church, laden with food brought by the townspeople. Archer stayed close to Beatrice's side, introducing her to those she hadn't yet met and keeping a watchful eye on her comfort. She noticed how people respected him. Men nodded deferentially, women smiled warmly, and children looked up at him with obvious admiration. "Mr. Turner saved my cat from a coyote," a small girl informed Beatrice seriously. "He helped build our barn after the fire," added a weathered farmer. "Wouldn't have survived my first winter without his help," an elderly widow confided. With each story, Beatrice's understanding of Archer deepened. He was clearly more than just a rancher. He was a pillar of this community, someone people turned to in times of need. As the social continued, Archer gently guided Beatrice away from the crowd toward a quiet spot beneath a large cottonwood tree. "Overwhelming?" he asked perceptively. "A bit," she admitted. "Everyone's been very welcoming, but there are so many names to remember." "You'll get to know them all soon enough. Most of their children will be in your classroom tomorrow." The reminder of her imminent teaching duties brought a flutter of nervousness to Beatrice's stomach. "I hope I don't disappoint them." Archer's expression softened. "You won't. You have a strength about you, Beatrice. I saw it the moment I found you behind that wagon, pistol in hand, ready to fight despite impossible odds." His words bolstered her confidence. "Thank you for believing in me." "Always will," he replied simply. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the church. A rider had arrived, his horse lathered from hard riding, and was speaking urgently to Sheriff Wilson. Archer frowned, excusing himself to join them. Beatrice watched as the three men conversed intently, the sheriff's expression growing grim while Archer's posture stiffened. When he returned to her side, his face was troubled. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Trouble at the Nelson homestead," he replied quietly. "Seems not all the Calloway gang died in that ambush. 2 brothers weren't with the group that attacked your stage. They've been spotted near the Nelson place, likely planning revenge for their kin." Beatrice felt a chill despite the warm day. "The Nelson place, about 10 miles east." "Daniel Nelson has a wife and 4 children." Archer's jaw tightened. "The sheriff's forming a posse. I need to join them." "Of course," Beatrice said, trying to hide her disappointment and worry. "When will you go?" "Now, no time to waste." He hesitated, clearly torn. "I'm sorry to leave you like this." "Don't apologize. Those people need help," he nodded, gratitude in his eyes. "Martha will see you home safely. I'll come find you when I return." With that promise, he strode away to join the group of men gathering near the sheriff's office. Beatrice watched him go, a prayer for his safety forming in her heart. That evening, alone in her quarters, Beatrice tried to focus on final preparations for her first day of teaching, but her mind kept returning to Archer and the danger he might be facing. The Calloway brothers, if they were anything like the men who had attacked her stagecoach, would be ruthless and desperate. Sleep eluded her as she imagined various scenarios, each worse than the last. By morning, she was exhausted, but determined not to let it affect her first day as Promise Creek's teacher. The schoolroom filled quickly with children of all ages, from tiny 6-year-olds with wide, curious eyes to lanky teenagers trying to appear uninterested. Beatrice greeted each one, working to memorize names and faces while establishing her authority from the outset, just as Martha had advised. "Good morning," she began once all were seated. "I am Miss Green, and I'm honored to be your teacher. In this room, we will learn together, work together, and treat each other with respect." The day progressed better than she had dared hope. The younger children were eager to please, while the older ones quickly discovered that Beatrice would not tolerate disruption, but also wouldn't ignore their questions or interests. By dismissal time, she felt cautiously optimistic about her ability to teach this diverse group. As the children filed out, Martha Swenson appeared in the doorway. "How was your first day, dear?" she asked. "Challenging but rewarding," Beatrice replied honestly. Martha nodded approvingly. "That's teaching for you. Never gets easier, but the rewards grow." She hesitated before adding, "No word yet from the posse. Sheriff's wife says they may be gone several days tracking those outlaws." Beatrice tried not to show her disappointment. "Of course, it's important work." "Archer asked me specifically to check on you," Martha said, her eyes twinkling knowingly. "Seems our most eligible bachelor has taken quite an interest in our new teacher." Beatrice felt her cheeks warm. "He's been very kind." "Kind isn't the word I'd use," Martha replied with a chuckle. "That man's been alone on that ranch of his for 3 years, barely giving any woman a second glance. Then you arrive, and suddenly he's attending socials and looking like he swallowed the sun when he smiles at you. Unsure how to respond, Beatrice busied herself organizing papers on her desk. "It's nothing to be embarrassed about," Martha continued gently. "Archer Turner is a good man, the best kind, honorable to his core, lost too much in his young life, which makes him cautious with his heart." She patted Beatrice's hand. "Just thought you should know." The next 3 days followed a similar pattern, teaching during the day, preparing lessons in the evening, and trying not to worry about Archer and the posse still absent from town. Beatrice threw herself into her work, determined to prove herself worthy of the community's trust. On Thursday afternoon, as she was dismissing the children, she heard a commotion outside. Looking through the schoolhouse window, she saw riders entering town, the returning posse. Her heart leapt at the sight of Archer among them, apparently unharmed. The children scattered, running to greet fathers and brothers returning from the pursuit. Beatrice remained in the doorway, watching as Archer dismounted and spoke briefly with Sheriff Wilson before his eyes began scanning the street, eventually finding her. He crossed to the schoolhouse in long strides, his face weary but brightening as he approached. "You're safe," she said, relief evident in her voice. "Promised I'd come back, didn't I?" he replied with a tired smile. "The Calloway brothers," his expression darkened, "won't trouble anyone again. They fired on us when we tried to take them in, left us no choice." He changed the subject, clearly not wanting to dwell on the violence. "How was your first week of teaching?" "Still in progress, but going well, I think. The children are bright and eager to learn, even the Harker boys." He asked with raised eyebrows. "They've run off 2 teachers already with their pranks." Beatrice smiled. "Sam and Levy, they tested me on day 1 with a snake in my desk drawer. I simply picked it up, identified it as a harmless garter snake, and used it for an impromptu natural science lesson." Archer laughed, the sound warming her. "I'd have paid good money to see their faces. They've been model students since," she added with a touch of pride. "Miss Green," he said, his tone turning serious, "I find myself thinking about you even when I should be concentrating on tracking dangerous outlaws. That's never happened to me before." The directness of his statement took her breath away. "I've thought about you too," she admitted. "Worried about you?" He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Would you ride out to my ranch with me on Saturday? I'd like to show you my home if you're willing." "I'd like that very much." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the plains. "I'll come for you at noon then." True to his word, Archer arrived precisely at noon on Saturday, driving a polished buggy rather than his usual wagon. Beatrice had dressed practically in a simple riding skirt and jacket, her hair secured against the wind. "You look lovely," Archer said as he helped her into the buggy. The journey to his ranch took them north of town, following the creek through rolling grasslands dotted with wildflowers. Archer pointed out landmarks and shared stories of his early days in the territory, when he'd arrived with nothing but his horse, rifle, and determination to build something lasting. "What made you choose this particular spot?" Beatrice asked as they crested a hill. "You'll see in just a moment," he promised. As they reached the top of the rise, Beatrice gasped at the view spread before them. A verdant valley cradled a sturdy log home and outbuildings, with cattle grazing on the lush grass beside a clear stream. Behind it all stood the majestic backdrop of distant mountains, their peaks still snow-capped even in late spring. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "This view is what sold me," Archer admitted. "Rode up this hill, saw this valley, and knew I was home." He guided the buggy down to the ranch where he'd clearly prepared for her visit. The house was tidy, a vase of wildflowers sat on the table, and delicious smells emanated from the cookstove. "You cooked?" Beatrice asked, surprised. "Man can't survive on his own without learning," he replied with a smile. "Nothing fancy, but it's edible." The meal proved more than merely edible, a hearty stew with fresh baked bread that Beatrice complimented sincerely. Afterward, Archer showed her around his property, the barn where he proudly introduced her to his horses, the corrals where young calves frolicked, and finally, a small fenced garden plot behind the house. "My latest project," he explained, somewhat sheepishly. "Trying to grow some vegetables. Not having much luck yet." "The soil looks good," Beatrice observed, kneeling to examine it, But these are planted too close together, they'll choke each other out. I knew I was doing something wrong, he admitted. My talents lie elsewhere. I could help, she offered. I used to maintain a garden with my father. I'd welcome the advice. They spent a pleasant hour reorganizing his garden, Beatrice demonstrating proper spacing and depth for the various seeds and seedlings. Archer proved an attentive student, asking thoughtful questions and following her instructions carefully. As the afternoon waned, they sat on the porch, enjoying the view and each other's company. The conversation flowed easily between them, touching on books they'd read, places they'd seen, and hopes for the future. "Do you miss Boston?" Archer asked. Beatrice considered the question. "I miss certain aspects, the libraries, the concerts, the bustle of city life. But it stopped feeling like home after my father died." She gazed out at the sweeping landscape. "This feels more like where I belong now, even after such a short time." "Sometimes you just know," she replied simply. Archer's eyes held hers. "Yes, sometimes you do." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken understanding. Finally, Archer cleared his throat. "I should get you back to town before dark." The return journey was quieter, both lost in thought but comfortable in the silence. As Promise Creek came into view, Archer spoke. "Beatrice, I want to be clear about my intentions. I'm not a man who takes matters of the heart lightly." "Nor am I," she replied. "What I'm trying to say, perhaps badly, is that I care for you, more than I expected to, and certainly more quickly than I thought possible." He glanced at her, vulnerability in his eyes. "If that frightens you, or if you need more time, it doesn't frighten me," she interrupted gently. "And while prudence might suggest more time, my heart seems disinclined to listen to prudence where you're concerned." His smile was worth any impropriety in her candor. As spring bloomed into summer, Archer and Beatrice's courtship became the talk of Promise Creek. He attended school functions, helping build new bookshelves for her classroom and organizing a community effort to add a proper playground. She visited his ranch on weekends, transforming his fledgling garden into a productive plot that drew admiring comments from neighboring ranchers. Their growing relationship faced its first serious test in late July, when a telegram arrived for Beatrice from Boston. Her father's former colleague had died, leaving her a substantial inheritance on the condition she returned to Boston to claim it and assume a teaching position at a prestigious girls' school. "It's an incredible opportunity," Archer said when she showed him the telegram, his voice carefully neutral despite the pain in his eyes. "Financial security, professional advancement, and abandoning everything I've built here," Beatrice added, watching his face. "I would never ask you to stay if Boston is where you truly want to be. And if it isn't," his eyes met hers, hope warring with fear, "then I would ask you to consider a different future entirely." That evening, as they walked along the creek that gave the town its name, Archer stopped beneath a towering cottonwood tree and took both her hands in his. "I had planned to wait longer, to court you properly as you deserve," he began, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. "But circumstances have forced my hand." He took a deep breath. "Beatrice Green, I love you. I think I have since that first moment I saw you behind that wagon, frightened but unbowed. Every day since has only deepened that feeling." Beatrice felt tears spring to her eyes at the raw emotion in his voice. "I know what I'm offering can't compare to Boston," he continued. "I have no fortune, just land and cattle and a house that needs a woman's touch. But I can promise you this: every sunrise we share, every season that passes, you will never doubt that you are loved, respected, and cherished." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small gold ring with a modest diamond. "This was my mother's. I've carried it since she passed, waiting for the right woman to give it to." He looked into her eyes. "Will you marry me, Beatrice? Will you make Promise Creek your permanent home?" She answered without hesitation. "Yes, Archer, yes, with all my heart." His face transformed with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then gathered her into his arms for a kiss that promised a lifetime of happiness. The following Sunday, they announced their engagement to the community after church services. The news was met with cheers and congratulations, though few expressed genuine surprise. Martha Swenson later confided to Beatrice that there had been a betting pool in town regarding when Archer would propose, with Sheriff Wilson winning the pot for guessing the closest date. "Never seen a man fall so hard or so fast," Martha said with satisfaction. "Does my heart good to see Archer Turner finally finding happiness." With Beatrice's commitment to teaching through the school year, they set their wedding date for the following June, after classes ended. The months of their engagement passed in a flurry of work and planning. Archer expanded his house, adding a proper parlor and a second bedroom for the future, as he said with a meaningful look that made Beatrice blush. For her part, Beatrice threw herself into her teaching, determined to prove that her decision to remain in Promise Creek was professionally as well as personally motivated. Her innovative methods and genuine care for her students earned her the respect of even the most skeptical parents. The winter brought challenges blizzards that trapped Beatrice in town and Archer at his ranch for days at a time, illness that swept through the community claiming 2 elderly residents, and the constant struggle against the elements that defined frontier life. Yet through it all, their commitment to each other never wavered. Spring arrived with renewed optimism and accelerated wedding preparations. The entire town became involved, with women sewing, men building, and children practicing songs for the celebration. Archer and Beatrice's union had become a community event, symbolizing Promise Creek's growth and permanence. As the wedding day approached, Beatrice received another telegram from Boston, her father's colleague's widow expressing disappointment at her decision but respecting her choice and offering a compromise. The inheritance would fund a proper library for Promise Creek if Beatrice would commit to establishing educational standards for the growing settlement. "She's offering us a gift," Archer said when Beatrice shared the news. "A way to bring a piece of your old life into our new one together." "Our children will have books," Beatrice replied, picturing the future they would build. The morning of their wedding dawned clear and perfect. The small white church had been decorated with wildflowers gathered by Beatrice's students, and every resident of Promise Creek and surrounding homesteads had gathered to witness the union. Beatrice wore a gown of ivory satin sent by her Boston friends, her chestnut hair adorned with a crown of blue forget-me-nots. As Martha helped with the final adjustments in the schoolhouse that served as her dressing room, Beatrice's hands trembled with anticipation. Nervous. Martha asked kindly, "Not about marrying Archer," Beatrice replied honestly, "just hoping I can be what he needs, what this community needs." "Oh, my dear," Martha said, patting her cheek, "you already are." A knock at the door revealed Sheriff Wilson, who had offered to escort Beatrice to the church in place of her deceased father. "It's time, Miss Green," he said, offering his arm, "though I reckon this is the last time anyone will call you that." The short walk to the church seemed to last both an eternity and no time at all. As they reached the chapel door, Beatrice caught her first glimpse of Archer waiting at the altar, tall and handsome in a new black suit, his face solemn until he saw her. Then his expression transformed into such naked joy that tears sprang to her eyes. Sheriff Wilson placed her hand in Archer's, and the touch of his fingers around hers steadied her racing heart. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Matthews began, his voice carrying through the packed church. The ceremony itself was a blur for Beatrice, her focus entirely on Archer's face and the vows they exchanged. His voice was clear and unwavering as he made his promises. "I, Archer James Turner, take you, Beatrice Elizabeth Green, to be my lawfully wedded wife. Before God and these witnesses, I pledge to you my life, my protection, and my undying love. All that I have, my land, my home, my name I share with you freely and joyfully. In sickness and health, in plenty and want, in joy and sorrow, as long as we both shall live." When it came time for Beatrice to speak her vows, she was surprised by the steadiness of her own voice, despite the emotion welling in her chest. "I, Beatrice Elizabeth Green, take you, Archer James Turner, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to stand by your side through whatever life brings us, to create a home filled with love and learning, to support your dreams as you have supported mine. My heart, my future, my very self I entrust to you from this day forward until death parts us." Reverend Matthews smiled as he pronounced them husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. You may kiss your bride. Archer gently lifted Beatrice's veil, his blue eyes shining with unshed tears. I love you, Mrs. Turner, he whispered before lowering his lips to hers in a kiss that sealed their vows before God and community. As they turned to face the congregation as husband and wife, Beatrice felt a sense of rightness, of belonging, that confirmed beyond any doubt she had found her true home. From the terrifying attack on the stagecoach to this moment of perfect joy, her journey had led her exactly where she was meant to be beside a man who had pledged everything he had to her happiness, in a community that had embraced her as their own. Outside the chapel door, Archer paused to kiss her again, this time with less restraint, his arms pulling her close against him as the townspeople cheered. Ready to start our life together, Mrs. Turner? He asked, his voice husky with emotion. I've been ready since the moment you found me, Mr. Turner, she replied, her heart overflowing with love. Hand in hand, they stepped into the bright Wyoming sunshine, toward the future they would build together. 5 years later, Archer stood on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching his wife in the garden with their 3-year-old son James and infant daughter Elizabeth. The morning sun caught the gold of Beatrice's wedding ring as she showed little James how to pull weeds without disturbing the growing vegetables. Promise Creek had flourished in those 5 years, nearly doubling in size. The school now had 2 teachers, Beatrice and a young woman from Denver who handled the younger children. The library, funded by Beatrice's inheritance, had become the pride of the community, drawing visitors from throughout the territory. Archer's ranch had prospered as well. With Beatrice's careful accounting and his hard work, they'd expanded their holdings to 500 acres and built a reputation for quality cattle that brought buyers from as far as Chicago. But his greatest joy remained his family. Watching Beatrice laugh as James presented her with a muddy carrot, seeing baby Elizabeth's drowsy smile as she woke from her nap in the shade, these moments were worth more than all the land and cattle in Wyoming. Beatrice looked up, catching his gaze, and the love that passed between them was as powerful as it had been that day at the chapel door when he had pledged everything to her, his land, his name, his life, and sealed it with a kiss. Are you just going to stand there watching, or are you going to help us? She called with a teasing smile. Just appreciating the view, he replied, descending the steps to join his family in the garden that Beatrice had made flourish, much as she had done with his heart. As he reached them, James launched himself at his father's legs while Elizabeth gurgled happily from her blanket. Archer scooped up his son, tousling the boy's dark hair so like his own. Papa, Mama showed me how the plants drink water through their roots, James announced importantly. Like straws, did she now? Archer replied seriously. Your mama is the smartest person I know. And the prettiest, James added, clearly repeating something he'd heard his father say many times. That too, Archer agreed, meeting Beatrice's eyes over their son's head. She blushed, even after 5 years of marriage still susceptible to his compliments. You two are impossible, she said, but her smile betrayed her pleasure. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Archer and Beatrice sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. Her head rested on his shoulder, his arm around her waist, the comfortable silence of long married lovers surrounding them. Do you ever regret it? Archer asked quietly. Choosing this life over Boston, Beatrice lifted her head to look at him, surprise in her eyes. Never, not for a single moment. Even during that blizzard last winter when we were trapped inside for 6 days with a teething baby and a rambunctious toddler, she laughed softly. Even then. This is where I belong, Archer, with you, with our children in this home we've built together. He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. I thank God every day for bringing you to me, even if it took outlaws and a stagecoach robbery to do it. God works in mysterious ways, she agreed, settling back against him. As darkness fell and stars appeared in the vast Wyoming sky, they remained on the porch, planning the future James's education, Elizabeth's first birthday celebration, the possibility of more children to fill their home with laughter and love. In the distance, a coyote called to its mate, and somewhere an owl hooted softly. The night sounds of the land that had become their own provided a familiar backdrop to their quiet conversation. Archer Turner had once been a solitary man, focused only on building his ranch and helping his neighbors. Now he was the center of a growing family, his life rich with purpose and joy. And it had all begun with a chance encounter, a stagecoach attack, a terrified but brave young woman, and a rescue that had saved them both in ways neither could have imagined. As the night grew cooler, he stood and offered his hand to his wife. "Shall we go in, Mrs. Turner?" Beatrice placed her hand in his, the gesture as natural as breathing after 5 years of marriage. "Lead the way, Mr. Turner." Together they entered their home, closing the door on the vast Wyoming night, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them as they had faced everything since that fateful day, side by side, their love a foundation as solid as the land they called home.